Today we're going to show you how we turn this pantry into this. Alright, so Jeremy was going to wing it with the measurements in here. He didn't want to take these out until we were ready to install because he didn't want to mess. I feel like it's better if we have measurements, like true measurements, not just winging it. So while he was grilling, I decided to clean it out.
I wasn't going to wing it.
You were winging it.
I was still going to use a tape measure. Oh God.
What happened? Did you just knock a hole?
It's fine. Fine.
Jeremy!
I love you.
I think what's funny is if I would have done it, I would have got all kinds of crap for it.
So if you're watching this and you're like, hey honey, let's go rip some stuff out. Let's go rip a closet out or a pantry. Let's get started. They did it. I want you to understand something. It's always easy to rip stuff out. We ripped that out in maybe 10 minutes. It's going to take a long time to rebuild all this back in. So on these lower cabinets, I'm just using dados for the joinery. If you don't have a table saw or a dado blade, it's not a big deal. You can do this with a pocket hole jig just the same. And here in a bit, you're gonna see on the upper cabinets that I used a pocket hole jig for those. Okay, so we got those dados cut out. It is always such a good feeling when you get them cut and everything slides into place. It's not too tight, it's not too loose. It's just exactly where you want it to be. As with any kind of joinery, you can't have enough glue and clamps. These clamps that I'm using are from Harbor Freight and they work just fine. After that, we're going to throw in some pocket screws into these stretchers across the back. And then also, we're going to pocket screw the face frame together from the back side. And once you install the face frame, you're never going to see those screws.
So the second lower cabinet is the one that faces you when you walk into the pantry with drawers in it. It's not as deep as a typical cabinet just because we didn't want to take up too much space, but we built it the same way. The main difference being we added a few more dividers for the drawers.
Okay, so since we are needing to put a microwave in this pantry, it needs an outlet. Unfortunately, it doesn't have one. Basically, I'm going to cut out kind of a chase around the wall, about 3 or 4 inches thick, and cut it out of the drywall. That way we can route some wiring through to run up for an outlet. All right, so we came up here trying to find a place to pull off of for our plug down below in the pantry, and there's a plug up here in the attic that was put in here by the builders. But as I was looking at this, trying to figure out if we could pull off this plug, I've now found that there's something going on there, as you can see, and it's all black, and so there's something wrong here. Okay, so we have drilled a hole down through the top plate of the wall, and so what we're going to do now is we're going to take one of these, I call them fish sticks. Basically they just go together. They're these kind of fiberglass rods, and you can use these to pull wire through walls with. They're super handy. Hopefully we'll be able to push this down through the wall and get that wire pulled out. Holy cow, I got it. Look at there. I thought that was going to be hard to do. I want to show you real quick the importance of getting electrical stuff right. So if you look at this outlet, I don't know if you can tell this very well or not, but that thing is charred and it's kind of melted right there and burnt. And what the problem was is that connection was loose. So I've replaced that plug, put a different plug in there, and hopefully won't have that problem anymore. So I would be lying if I said the upper cabinets didn't intimidate me a little bit, mainly because it needed a corner cabinet and I'd never built one of those. So I cut out a pattern to act as the bottom, and then I took and I made 2 more shelves and a top that I then cleaned up with a flush trim bit to make them exactly the same as the pattern. And this actually worked really well. This was a little hard for me to wrap my head around because these edges are where my pocket holes end up going. And everything just felt a little bit upside down and backwards as I was doing some of this stuff because I'm just so used to doing a simple straight cabinet. But basically I just pocket screwed everything together. And the reason that I used pocket screws was because I wasn't convinced with such a different type cabinet that I could do the dados and make everything come out right.
And then after that, we start the process of clamping everything up and adding pocket screws. Make sure when you add your pocket screws that you put the holes on the top and bottom side of the cabinets. That way when you look at the cabinet when it's assembled, those holes will be hidden. And when it comes to the middle shelves, we've opted for adjustable shelving with shelf pins, so we won't have to do any joinery for those.
And if you happen to have a second pair of hands for this, that's always a big help. This is where we were talking about those pocket screws being in a hidden location. Just because while you can fill pocket holes, I find it's a lot of work, so anytime you can hide them, that's always much more desirable. So I built this oddball kind of triangular shaped piece. This is going to end up going in this corner of the corner cabinet. I think this is the best way to do it. I talked to a buddy of mine, Brandon, that gave me a tip on this, and so I kind of think this is, in my mind, I think this is how this should work, so hopefully it's right.
So with the corner cabinet bones built, we'll start building the other 2 cabinets that we'll pull off of that corner. Now, there's nothing really special about these cabinets, so we won't go into a ton of detail on this, but a couple of tips that we will give would be first, to use a good quality plywood. We prefer Baltic birch when we can get it. We have a local hardwood supplier that carries it normally, but with COVID, the price has just gotten so extravagant that we've opted for what they call a primo ply, which they suggested was second to Baltic birch in terms of quality. Now, you can use regular birch or maple plywood from Home Depot or Lowe's, and we've used lots of it in the past, but what we find most of the time with those plywoods is that they have about 5 or 6 plies in a 3/4 inch sheet, and a Baltic birch or even this primo ply will have over twice that. And the biggest benefit to that, in our opinion, is screw holding power and strength overall. You can strip out a pocket screw fairly easy in cheaper plywood, and with Baltic birch, you can almost break the screw off before you strip it out.
Now, most of the time whenever we build a cabinet, we like to leave the back off of it before we stain or paint it. It just makes accessing all the nooks and crannies a little bit easier. But in this case, this cabinet is the one with the drawers, so you're not really going to see the back at all. Also, we've opted for a 3/4 inch back when we just never go over a 1/2 inch, but we're adding undermount drawer slides to this, and by using a 3/4 inch piece for the back, this will allow plenty of meat to screw into when we attach those drawer slides to the back of the cabinet.
I really can't explain how nice it is to be able to spray these cabinets. We do roll and brush paint, but when we have the ability to spray, it's really nice because you can paint them so fast. It takes longer to clean the sprayer in most cases than it does to actually spray them. The only downside is that we live in northeastern Oklahoma and we're close enough to Kansas that we do get some wind, and so we have to pick our days so that we avoid overspraying on the house and anything else. Another downside to spraying outside is we do fight bugs getting in the finish, or even if a neighbor starts mowing the lawn, then we've got dust floating around. So you do fight some things spraying outside, but man, is it nice when you're able to do it.
right, so now we're going to install the hardware for the drawers. And normally we go with a Bloom undermount drawer slide. That's what we've done in the kitchen. But what we found was that they're actually on back order and they're kind of hard to come by right now. So we talked to our hardwood supplier, which is Dakota Hardwoods, and they had these, they suggested these are an import. Essentially they look exactly the same, but I've never used them before. So it's going to be interesting to see if it all goes together just the same, if it feels just as strong, and then of course how the mechanism works when we actually operate the drawers and stuff. So when I do these on a face frame, I like to use, this is a drawer slide jig from Craig, and it's actually for the side mount drawer slides, but I found a way that this kind of works, and basically I take this and I use this and I'll mount this here and I'll clamp it down. And you'll see this here in a minute, but I'll clamp this down, and when I do, it will actually, then I can set the drawer slide in there and get everything mounted in place. Makes it a lot simpler. Bam! Bam! So the next thing we're going to do is add the backs to the cabinets. We just brought them inside, laid them down on a blanket, added a little bit of glue, and then shot them in with a finish nailer. And as we stand these up, you're going to see that they turned out really nice. Now, if you learn nothing else from this video, I want you to take this away from it. When you go to install your upper cabinets, please, for the love of God, do not install them like those goofballs that you see on HGTV. You know, the ones where like the husband's holding the cabinet up and the wife's trying to get the screw in the drill, and then she drops the screw, and then he cusses at her, and then he almost falls down with the cabinet, and then eventually they drop the cabinet, and all of that madness that ensues. All you gotta do is put down a ledger board first. This is just a 1x2 that we've leveled and screwed to the wall, and then we're just going to bring this cabinet in and lift it up and set it on the board. And this, my friends, will make your life so much easier. Now, once you've done that, we're going to use a true cabinet screw for this to hold it in place. And the difference is that these particular screws have a washer head on them to help prevent anything from ever pulling out. And then when you attach it, you're able to screw it through the top stretcher piece at the top. So unfortunately, they'll be visible, but on the bottom, there's about a 1/2 inch lip underneath the cabinet that you can attach through that will help hide the screw there to make it visibly more appealing.
Once you've got your cabinets in place, just remove the ledger board and fill the screw holes, and that's the easiest way to do it. And when you're done, you'll still have a marriage and cabinets that are intact and not completely destroyed because you and your spouse dropped them on the floor.
So it's at this point that you may have noticed that these cabinets don't have a face frame yet, and this is actually intentional. Normally you would add a face frame before installing, but also when you put cabinets with installed face frames together, you end up having about a 1/2 inch gap between them, and since we're in such a tight space, I wanted to utilize every inch of space that I could. I also wanted to create this really seamless look, and I knew that doing the face frame this way would help achieve that, and while I believe it did, and I do love the look, it did occur to me that in hindsight, one of these days if someone has to remove these cabinets, they're probably going to cuss me.
So we've been asked why we're not building our own butcher block tops. I mean, after all, they're made of wood and we're already building everything else in the pantry. And well, honestly, it's because we're already building everything else in the pantry. While most of the reason we build our own furniture, cabinets, etc. is because there's a huge cost savings and also the quality is better, it's nice sometimes to just purchase something that the quality is decent and the cost savings is negligible. These tops we used were about $109 a piece, and for us, it was worth the added expense to just have it ready to go.
So our cabinets are in an L shape and we need to put one set of tops between two walls. So I built this jig that's just a 1x4 with a slot cut in each end, and then add a triangular piece on the end with a bolt and a wing nut. This also works really well for adding shelving to a space between two walls or stair treads in the same fashion. And what this allows us to do is to adjust to the exact fit of the wall and then carefully bring that out and transfer that measurement to the butcher block tops. I've got a block that I'm using to simulate the back wall, and while this jig isn't wide enough to go across the entire top, I'll just take a straight edge and finish that line off.
It's definitely a little bit stressful cutting off a $100 butcher block top. So when you get ready to do this, I would advise you double and triple check your measurements. Now, when we did this, we just used a Craig AccuCut. We've used this thing for years, and while I'm sure a track saw would be better for the price, this thing's pretty hard to beat.
So if you remember, our cabinet is not a normal depth, and so the butcher block tops came in 25-inch widths. So we've got to rip that down a bit to make it fit our particular setup. And once we do that, we move to staining the tops. We used a Minwax Provincial for the color, and while there are a lot of other options out there, we've just used Minwax for years and we've had good luck with it. Also, don't forget to come back and wipe down the excess stain afterward, because that makes a big difference.
So earlier I said it was stressful cutting off the butcher block tops, and this is probably equally as stressful. Here, Jeremy is using a router to route a T-shaped groove to house a miter bolt. At first, we couldn't figure out the best way to connect these two tops. They're two different widths, so trying to miter the corners would look weird. We didn't want to pocket screw or glue it, so we ended up using a butt joint and then adding miter bolts to hold it in place. Basically, a miter bolt is just a bolt with two straps of metal on each end and a nut. And when you tighten that nut, it's going to pull the two pieces together. And it worked really well.
In my opinion, one of the best kept secrets I've discovered this year are these pre-made drawer box sides. Basically, these come in sizes ranging from 4, 6, 8, and 10-inch widths and 5-foot lengths. They're pre-finished with a rounded bull nose at the top that's also pre-finished. They have a 1/4-inch groove at the bottom that also is up about a 1/2 inch from the bottom to allow for undermount drawer slides if that's what you choose to use. Now, Dakota Hardwoods in the Tulsa area is who we bought these through, and they're really cheap in my opinion. They're about $5 for a 5-foot piece, which a typical drawer box is going to require probably 2 pieces, so I'm able to build these drawer boxes cheap and fast, and yet they still have excellent quality. And I think what it does is it makes building good quality drawer boxes available for people that maybe don't have a table saw. When we did our kitchen, I actually built these with rabbets for the joinery and made them a little more bougie, but on this pantry, I just wanted to use pocket screws and glue just to show you that this is possible for pretty much anyone. I know glue is a little bit questionable on finished material, and so I would suggest when you put the bottoms in to go ahead and add glue to that to help strengthen that box even more. And in case you're wondering, you can also purchase 1/4-inch pre-finished plywood sheets for the bottom, and that's what I did here.
For the backsplash, we decided to use Shiplap. We like Shiplap not only for the look, but also for the simplicity. It's so simple, in fact, that we actually let our boys that are 10 and 12 install Shiplap on our breakfast bar in our kitchen. We did a video about that, and if you want to catch that, we'll link that up as well. It's a really fun video, and it just shows how simple it is to install this.
We've recently switched to using undermount drawer slides. In our kitchen, we use the Bloom undermount drawer slides, and we really liked those. However, they're not available right now with shortages and things due to COVID. So we decided to go with what our hardwood supplier suggested as a second best option, which was an import that honestly ended up being about $5 a pair cheaper and basically looked pretty much identical. It's going to be interesting to see how these hold up over time, but if you're wondering, the brand was called Pride Industrial, and they're the model that has two-way adjustability. If you've got any other questions about installing these, we actually did a video about the 10 things we learned installing the Bloom undermount drawer slides. We'll link that up, so be sure and check that out because there's some really good tips there to help you out along the way. And just like everything else we've done in our kitchen, we've gone with shaker style drawer fronts. We've done a video about building shaker style cabinet doors, and basically these drawer fronts are very similar using tongue and groove joinery with one main difference. And that is that on the narrow drawers like these, we don't make the rails and stiles the same width. In this case, my stiles, which are the vertical pieces, are 2 1/4 inches, and my rails, which are the horizontal pieces, are 1 3/4 inches. This is mainly because if you keep them the same on a narrow drawer front, and then install a center panel. The center panel is so narrow, it looks odd in my opinion. Also, make sure your center panel is a 1/2 inch piece that gets rabbited down to a 1/4 inch to eliminate gaps between the drawer front and the drawer box.
When you install these drawer fronts, we have a video on this where we go into a lot more detail. We'll link up. Essentially, just drill the hardware holes first and then use those holes to screw the front on. And that holds it in place while we attach it from the inside, and it makes life super simple. So if you've made it this far, thank you so much. We really appreciate you guys following along with our DIY journey. Hopefully this has given you guys some inspiration for your pantry.
Yeah, and always any tools or hardware or anything that we've used, we'll link that up in the description below. Also, if you got any other questions, be sure and hit us up in the comments. You can also reach us on Instagram. We would be glad to help in any way that we can.
Be sure to hit that like button. If you haven't already, consider subscribing and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming projects.